This is a pilot episode originally titled Trades Podcast That Doesn't Have a Name Yet. We're happy to republish it under its branded name, Off the Clock, Toolbox Talk, Episode 3. If you find you're unsettled today by listening, reach out to a trusted friend or go to tradespodcast.com.
Hello, everyone. Welcome to the podcast that doesn't really have a name yet. We're talking about men in trades and the toxic drug poisoning crisis, and we would love your help to come up with a name. You can go to tradespodcast.com and leave some feedback.
I'm Karen, and I am the creator of this project, and
my name is Daniel Snyder. I'm a coordinator for Overdose Response Project in beautiful British Columbia, Canada.
This is part 2 of Building Hope, Digging Deeper, featuring George Passmore. We're picking up right where we left off from Building Hope Part 1.
Very good questions, and we've now started talking about harm reduction, really.
Mm-hmm.
And
Absolutely.
I think for me, for many years, it was either you're using or you're not. So it was black and white, like that was it. And there was no freedom actually to have a more critical and nuanced thought about my substance use, like the questions you're just putting forward, George, because the only option was become abstinent.
Absolutely. And, there's these dominant narratives in our society about things like substance use. Of course, some substances get glamorized in our society unless you have a problem with it, and then there's shame.
Yep.
Absolutely. Like, hey, let's go get some beers. Right? That's all great. Oh, you have a problem with alcohol? Wow.
Yeah.
And then these other dominant narratives around, well, if you have a problem, the only response to that is abstinence.
Mm-hmm.
Harm reduction, I really think of it as a way of being able to take care of yourself while you're getting the benefits of this substance, right?
Mm-hmm.
How can I be aware of, where I don't want to experience this kind of harm or difficulty in my life? So how can I change my relationship with it? Unfortunately, I feel like, still to this day, there's this polarization in our field around harm reduction or abstinence.
Yeah.
As though there's this debate that there's a, one path only to consider, that if someone considers Suboxone or methadone or Acadian for, that, oh, that's not abstinence, or that just using differently, like using an opioid. I'm thinking about the book Drug Use for Grown-Ups by Carl Hart.
Ooh, that sounds interesting. I haven't read that one.
He's a doctor. Check him out on YouTube. He's a physician who uses heroin, and he uses it very responsibly. And he'll say in interviews, I did not use before this interview because I really value being clear-minded during these. And what I enjoy about heroin is the sense of ease and bliss it gives me. But I'm thoughtful about the dose. I'm thoughtful about when and where and with whom. So, and I'm also considerate of tolerance, dependence, withdrawal. So he has a relationship with it that's very deliberate.
Yeah.
Right? So it's not abstinence or harm reduction. He's having a thoughtful relationship with it. And as that relationship changes, then maybe he changes his mindset about it.
I believe he's also mentioned the importance of knowing the source of your drugs, and that he's addressed the toxic supply in North America. And I don't think he would access the illicit market in North America, considering the risk that's there. And so another harm reduction principle in terms of just taking and considering what is in your hand. And if you're accessing illicit drugs here, you probably don't know what's in your hand.
Absolutely. So one of the important things in this video was we wanted to make sure that we had the both and message. That if you think you might like to explore a life without substances and see and address whatever is waiting for you when you put the substance down, like, oh, okay, I got to deal with my emotions differently. I got to learn how to connect differently. I got to learn how to celebrate differently. If that's something you're open to, then yes, absolutely, you can ask for help. You cannot be punished for asking for help in your industry legally. there's a duty to accommodate,
Yeah.
right? Trust that, right? But we also wanted to have the and message of, and substance use is okay, right? It's if you're using, consider your safety. So we wanted messages like drug checking. If you're getting a new batch from somewhere, like we have a spectrometer at Peace Point Overdose Prevention Service. It's a $50,000 piece of equipment, so we only get it.
Woo.
We have to share it with other parts of Surrey. But you can know exactly what's in it, right? And if you're not going to get it checked, then yes, things like going slow, right? Taking a tester, seeing the effect for a bit, right? And we did have someone on our community action team who used lifeguard. You set the timer. If you don't turn it off. So his mother was very surprised to wake up to firefighters running down her hallway because they knew exactly where he was and they saved his life. He was
Wow.
going down.
And
So
that was through the Lifeguard
the
app?
lifeguard app, yes.
The Lifeguard app is an app. You just search it. It's like a Blue Cross imagery
Logo.
graphic logo.
Yeah.
Thank you. As you're using there's somebody else on the other end who's just checking in with you and making sure that you're there.
Not on lifeguard. On lifeguard, it's just a timer.
Okay.
But they know it knows your location. So if you don't turn it off, it alerts 911 and they know exactly where you are. The Brave app, there's somebody on the other end who's also providing a bit of, connection and care. And for some people, that's quite comforting.
Yeah.
And it's been strongly used actually. So yeah, then you've got options. It's like, I don't want to hear anyone else's voice when I'm using it. I just want to be in my own little cocoon. But if it's like, no, I don't want 911 to be called automatically. I want someone with a bit of discretion here.
Can I bring something up? Comment from one of the Building Hope videos. One of the gentlemen who's interviewed, Trevor, said something about how the people around you love you and they want to see you get healthy. And I was thinking about that, and then one of my favorite bands, The National, just released a song, and the lyrics are, "This isn't helping at all. You think it's kindness, but it's not." And I think of the people that were in my life who wanted to help me. Some of them were genuinely helpful. Some of them thought they were helping.
Yes.
And I'm just wondering, how do we go about knowing who is there for us really, like, and how we can connect with these people, and then also maybe how to deal with the people who think they're helping but they're not.
Yes. And I would say, Trevor's line in the video is beautiful, because he didn't realize he was so full of shame, and he hid his use so strongly from his family. And he couldn't have imagined how much they would have been there for him and how much they were there for him. All of their reactions to him, all the anger, all the blame, he didn't understand at the time that all they wanted was for him to be well. They just didn't know how to, I guess, approach it from a compassionate, supportive way.
Yeah.
So we have a support group for affected family members, and there are many kind of common pitfalls that family members do get drawn into. And it's often like they take the substance use personally. And lecturing, anger, can't you see this is harming you? Can't you see this is harming us? If you loved us, you wouldn't be doing this. Some of the reactions I'm talking about are just human reactions to, and really coming from the sense that the person is always necessarily consciously choosing this behavior and not recognizing that they may be captivated by it or hijacked. Because after a certain point, with things like opioids, you're just constantly on the run from being dope sick, which is one of the worst things I've ever witnessed a person go through.
Yeah, the way I describe that, George, because I detoxed off opioids a lot. Withdrawal is very unpleasant. And yeah, that was the life, was avoiding that, right? I mean, I couldn't even count how many times I had detox, but I remember describing that feeling as like the worst flu you've ever experienced combined with the worst anxiety you've ever experienced with the knowledge that $20 will fix everything.
Absolutely. And the desperation to turn that pain off with that $20, it's so easy to judge the behaviors that can arise out of things like opioid dependence. But someone likened it to, if your head was being held underwater, what would you push through in order to get your next breath of oxygen? Right?
Mm-hmm.
It was described to me as that kind of desperation from
Hmm.
folks.
Yeah.
So there's things that people may do that they would never dream of doing if they weren't submerged under the water. So I think for family members, it's being able to make that an imaginative leap into a world that they've never experienced. And I think there's a few metaphors like that that can support a bit more compassion and being able to see that this person's not just making an uncaring choice,
Yeah.
right? And I think being able to separate the person who you love from the substance use, which is a behavior.
Mm-hmm.
And so then maybe you can have a conversation where you're concerned about the substance use, but loving and supportive to the person. It allows you to have more of a relationship of ongoing connection while maybe having a boundary, if you need one, around the substance use. Most of the people who come to our support group are parents of adult children who
Yeah.
are struggling with substance use. And for some of them, they come to a point it's like, well, I no longer feel like I can provide money or can't have them live with me anymore. And some of those are, I think, of boundaries as, how you define your own space for well-being. What do you need for you to be well? It's not about making the other person change.
Yeah.
Those aren't boundaries. That's control.
And do you have a lot of like, there was that tough love movement when I was
Yes.
growing up in the 80s, and I still find
Yes.
that's quite pervasive. So, do you want to talk about
Yes,
that?
I do. Yeah, we did a whole community dialogue about that for families. And tough love, whenever I actually see it in action, I see a lot of the tough and I don't feel a lot of the love.
Mm.
So it's more the sense of like, well, they need to hit rock bottom and then they'll want to change. And the person that who died in 2017, I mean, he'd been brought back from death many times. He woke up in a coma and swore he'd never use again.
Yeah.
Okay, what's more rock bottom than that? And yet he was compellingly continuing to use. It was actually more that he saw that there was some love in his life that he valued so much that he
Mm-hmm.
was willing to do whatever it took. I think the idea for us as counselors is, there's no such thing as waiting for rock bottom. It's actually more about, are there ways that we can help engage a person to connect with that they're worth it,
Mm.
right? For some people, it's not just that the substance use has become compelling, it's also that they've lost connection to caring about
Mm.
their own well-being. It's just kind of like, oh,
Mm.
what does it matter?
Yeah.
You know, what can I actually hope for in my life?
Mm.
What'll actually be there for me? What's the point in even bothering to try? Especially if I got to go through all this withdrawal and work through all this underlying stuff. Like, screw
Seems
it.
like a lot of work with
Oh,
no real certainty of where it's headed or
where's
why,
it heading?
right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
So much. We know that people do better in recovery if that's the journey that they want to embark on. People do better with support.
Mm.
The more positive resources and connections a person has in their lives, the more likely they are to find a path to wellness. So we actually know that the biggest predictor of wellness after a period of addiction is the number of recovery resources in their lives, whether that's an internal resource or an external one, a support group, family members. I think to your question earlier, Daniel, like what kind of people might you look to initially if your family members are all reacting and judging and maybe not so helpful, is thinking about who in my life would be so happy that I opened up to them,
Mm.
might be honored by it,
Yeah.
right? And I've got a sense that they have a bit of depth of empathy,
Hmm.
right? And willingness to kind of come alongside me for a moment. Yeah.
I think, one of the reasons that tough love narrative is hung on so strongly is because it was always paired with the opposite being enabling, which
Yeah.
isn't true. Uh, and so if you're not tough, if you're not operating in tough love, you must be actually enabling or slash supporting the addiction.
Dude.
And so, yeah, I really love that we're putting some nuance into this conversation, that it's not an either or, it's not black and white. And then I'm curious about where meaning and purpose fits into all this, in terms of helping propel people forward and understanding in the trades. I think I struggled at times to find meaning in my work.
Mm-hmm.
You know, was I building, was I painting a wall or was I painting a home? There is a difference there, right? I was someone who, had a belief that, well, maybe I could be doing something else. But the word wasn't else. The word was something more meaningful, something better. This is beneath me. Like I had beliefs about the fact that the work that I was doing was not really valuable work.
Right.
And in that sense, I also looked around me. I see people who are many, many years, decades older than me, doing the same work. And I'm like, oh, I'm going to be doing this forever.
Mm.
and,
I'm laughing
and
at the expression on Daniel's face.
and it was,
Right.
yeah, I felt trapped in life in a lot of ways, with no vision for the future and no real meaning and purpose in what I was doing at the time. And so one of the few comforts in my life was drugs. How do we encourage people to find meaning and purpose, even in what they are doing now? That the meaning and purpose is not out there somewhere necessarily, that you have to go searching for it. And maybe you do, but there is also meaning and purpose here now.
Mm-hmm. I'm going to imagine too, Danielle, that you probably didn't imagine that you would have too many people within the trades that you could even talk about this with,
No,
right?
I
Like,
did not want to.
no, because I mean, hey, what a threatening conversation, even just imagine for the other person. Like, hey, is there any point in what we're doing here, man? Isn't this beneath all of us? And it's interesting because had you had some of those conversations, you might have heard from some people, here's the meaning in it for me,
Mm.
right? Hey, as a counselor, I think this is very meaningful what I do, but there's some days when I wonder, man, what was actually accomplished today? I don't know the outcome of it
Mm-hmm.
all. Whereas I sometimes would envy people in the trades, like they could look at something and say, I did that, right?
Yeah.
That structure is standing because of what I put my energy into today
Mm-hmm.
with my
Yeah.
fellow tradespeople, right? So I kind of envied that concrete, accomplishment and production. So I
Yeah.
imagine some of those people that you see older than you, they might have the sense of like, instead of like, oh God, I'm gonna have to do this the rest of my life. For some of them, it's like, I got to do this for
Yes.
my life. I got to develop my skills, and those skills were, they grew and they were like, not everyone could do what I can do. There's a sense of like accomplishment and mastery, but
Mm-hmm.
also look at everything that exists now, like homes,
Mm-hmm.
right? Some meaningful additions to what's in our world.
Yeah.
So, yeah, it is all about how we construct our meaning.
I do want to say too, trades are not beneath anyone. I mean,
Oh, yeah, I know
trades
that.
are what make our world work. If we
Yeah.
stopped, if we didn't have electricians and plumbers tomorrow, we would all
Yep.
notice.
Yep.
Yes, we would.
uh,
There's so
uh,
much honor.
yeah.
Yes.
So there's tremendous value in that. And one of the things I've learned over the years, while working in this space and dealing with overdose and just, it's very heavy, a lot, and quite a burden to carry often. And then some days I can go and paint some apartments.
Yeah.
And at the end of the day, I've accomplished something, and I see it. I see the results on the wall, right?
Mm-hmm.
And it's an amazing experience to have when some days working and talking about overdose death and the lives of people, and just how are we going to bring about a change to this, and not seeing change really coming, not seeing an end to this anywhere in sight, that can be really, really discouraging. And so being able to go and do some work and paint a wall and see it finished is an amazing experience for me.
Yeah.
But it just does show, Daniel, doesn't it, that our beliefs contribute so much to how we experience life.
Yeah.
It's like a filter through which we look at the world, and that we a lens through which we think about ourselves and life. And so it's another thing to step back from and wonder, like, how is this belief serving me?
Yep.
What's the impact of holding this belief? And are there other ways that I can consider the meaning of my life, or how I can understand the beauty of what I'm doing,
Mm-hmm.
right? Or even the possibilities.
Even asking the question, is this belief true? There's a smart recovery principle or tool called DIBS, disputing irrational beliefs.
Yeah,
And, ask that question, is this a rational or an irrational belief? What do I believe about this thing? Have you ever asked that question?
right. I actually have three things that I ask myself when I consider a belief. Is this thought true? Is it kind? And is it helpful? Does it bring me anywhere better?
Hmm.
Right? Is this generative? Right? Does it contribute? Does it bring me closer to or further away from my better life?
Hmm.
So
By
is
the
this the
way,
kind of stuff that you would talk about if you went to see a counselor, or is it like you have to go through your whole childhood and
oh gosh,
everything that ever happened in your childhood that was wrong?
no. But counseling's so interesting because people can end up talking about something like counseling or treatment and have this idea, oh, it's this. To me, the beauty of counseling is it's a space that is here, and it's a therapeutic relationship that really starts off with understanding what's important to this individual and what's this person up for, and how they might like to go about exploring their lives.
So
And
the
we don't have
client
to
has
start.
some control in that.
Absolutely. Yeah, back in the day, I think when I started in this field, it was very prescriptive. There's this sense of like, oh, hey, you're experiencing some problems with your substance use. You need to go to 12-step meetings. You need a sponsor. Go to 90 meetings in 90 days. It's very, and if you're struggling with that, go to residential treatment. So it's all very prescriptive. But now there's so many pathways towards wellness. There's many things that got a person into this point, and there's many things that can support their evolution.
I
So
love that. That just hit me
there's
really hard that there's so like there's not one way anymore. And that, I would say that's probably an outcome of colonialism, that there was a very prescribed way, as you
there.
called it before, of this is exactly how it needs to happen. But I
Hmm.
love those ideas that there's all these things that influenced us to get to the point that we are now. And there's just as many things that influence us towards health to where we want to be.
Right. I think that's very encouraging for people because knowing that as I reach out for help, I'm not going to be pushed down a road that doesn't feel right for me.
Yeah, that's huge.
Right.
Or if you go down a road that's not right for you, then you can try another road.
Exactly. And you can try
Nice.
another road with that same counselor if they're, adaptive. And that's our spirit here, is at the end of every session, we check in genuinely around how's this landing for you? Are we talking about what you want to? How's this approach feeling? We
Mm-hmm.
can shift gears, right? Change trajectories. So we have lots of sessions where we don't even talk about substances.
That's probably huge for a lot of people because
Hmm.
lots of us think, and even when I was initially trained in the field, that's what you were going to be talking about is you're going to be talking. And I worked with
Yeah.
youth, but we were going to be talking about substances, and everybody expected it, and
Hmm.
Mm-hmm.
it was all very stereotyped and not productive.
I
Yeah.
remember being very frustrated by that because although I wasn't able to put it into words, I knew acutely that the drugs weren't really the problem.
Mm-hmm.
Like they were a solution for me.
An attempted solution.
Yeah, attempted solution. And so when the conversations were always focused on the drugs and stop using the drugs and the drugs are ruining your life, I never felt seen
Mm.
or heard.
Mm.
And it wasn't because people that were saying those things didn't care about me. It was
No.
simply that there wasn't any nuance, and we really just haven't had the education in our culture to understand this thing of addiction. And it's been we're growing in our understanding of it, but along the way we've had a lot of bad ideas
Yeah.
that have got stuck in
Yeah.
the cultural pipeline, and that we need to be slowly working, having conversations like this to kind of
Yes.
undo them and help people see the person.
Mm-hmm.
Mm. And also, I think including family members when that's helpful, so that the world around you can also be supported in working through their own emotional stuff, and maybe shifting their lens so they can see that it's okay to be supportive,
Yeah.
right? And that maybe there's some other ways of being supportive that land well for their loved one.
Mm-hmm.
Um, but I agree with you, Daniel. It's so important for each person to feel seen and understood. We actually know that the biggest contributor to outcome in the helping profession is the degree to which people experience the sense that the person helping them really gets what's important to them,
Mm-hmm.
right? And there's a good alliance with the meaning and purpose of this, and we're working towards the same thing. What the counseling sessions are focusing on, yes, this makes sense to me. I can work with this. I can follow this up between sessions. So, and if that's not happening, it's actually up to us as helpers to reflect that, to step back from the process, reflect on it, and think, okay, we've been looking at coping strategies so far, and maybe let's look at emotion regulation, whatever it might be.
So your counselor isn't there to lecture you. The counselor is
Yeah,
there to be a partner in helping you figure out whatever it is what you want to figure out.
truly collaborative.
And
Absolutely.
along the way, we celebrate incremental growth.
Yeah,
I'll just keep saying that always.
that's great.
Yeah.
Yeah, because for too long I wasn't able to celebrate unless I was only sober. And that other improvements in my life were meaningless when measured
Yeah.
against sobriety. And
Uh,
then I looked around myself and I noticed a lot of unhappy, miserable, sober people.
yeah.
Yeah.
And I was very confused.
Yeah,
The goal,
absolutely.
because the goal shouldn't be sobriety. The goal should be a rich and meaningful life, right?
Yes.
And if your substance use get in the way of that, all right, let's look at that. But yes, to speak to your point as well, Daniel, earlier around the well-intended family members, sometimes family members have a hard time celebrating the incremental
Mm,
changes.
Mm-hmm.
It's like, oh, what, you want a pat on the back now? You've been sober for a week,
Yeah.
right? Or you're using less. Well, I'm not celebrating this until you put it away.
mhm,
So it's important to have people in their life that say, hey, wow, this is must have been so challenging to make this kind of change, right?
mhm,
Think of any change you might want to make this week for anyone listening. What would be one habit that has been very strongly developed in your life that you might want to add or reduce or eliminate? Think what that would take, right?
Mm-hmm.
So any steps along the way, being able to notice that, oh, hey, I'm seeing some benefit to this, or now I have some confidence that I can change some things,
Yeah.
mhm,
And the
right?
stigmatization that we have of illicit substance use is a huge factor in all of this as well for families to try to get over that. And we're not going to go back in, we're not going to go into stigmatization today because it's a huge topic, but we will definitely be doing a few episodes on that to help us deconstruct it. But I also just wanted to reflect that I myself, and I know a number of people who have been on both sides of this conversation, who have been both the person needing and wanting help and support and the person who is in their hearts wanting to help but is not helping. And so this educational process, it's conversational, right? It's not like this isn't a lecture. This is us unpacking this. And that's why I'm saying I've been on both sides of this. And it's important to as a part of the growth process. And that's ultimately what we're wanting to facilitate here, is the growth process of hearing it, reflecting on it, thinking about it, and then applying it to wherever we want to apply it. And for some of us, it's going to be at both ends, because even people who are actively using are still employing the same cultural concepts of tough love, even though they may be an active user themselves, because it's all very cyclical, and it requires reflection. And, for me, I call it deconstructing. Like, let's just take this apart and see what's going on here. Or I like the term compassionate curiosity, where you're just be like, what is this? Why does this keep happening? Why do I keep arriving at the same spot again and again and again?
Yeah. Asking, curiosity really is a key by all means. I remember after one of many relapses having a friend who asked me, why did you relapse? Simple question, obvious question. And yet in that moment, I realized I hadn't been very curious about it. I had no answer. Mm-hmm. And, in his wisdom, he said, you probably should find an answer to that question. You might just keep repeating it if you can't answer it. Yeah. And that started me on a journey of trying to answer that question and understand what was underneath it. And so, if we can inspire people to get curious, then I think we're planting another seed of hope in their lives, because curiosity is fueled by hope for something different, something more.
I like the term compassionate curiosity, Karen, because curiosity and compassion are the antidote to judgment.
Yeah.
And judgment is really what's underneath stigma in the first place. So what we were talking about earlier around the power of belief, right? Any belief that is, not truth, and it's not kind or compassionate, and it's not helpful, like it doesn't generate anything, like judging someone's substance use does not actually bring them closer to changing their relationship with it.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
Being right and being effective are not the same thing.
Yep.
So if compassion is not present, right, then there's no engagement towards a genuine reflection. Think about anyone that's ever talked to us about something that is our behavior. When there's kindness there, when there's a compassion for us as people, and there's a space for like, oh, let's think about this, let's get curious about it. All right, I can come closer to that. But as soon as judgment is present, we're wired to defend against that. Or, and for some people, for it to diminish their sense of self, right? You spoke earlier, Daniel, about the not good enough kind of belief that you held. And so encountering that social belief around substance use is bad, or certain substance use is bad.
Yeah. Yeah.
Right. Then
not coffee.
Right. Then that, or alcohol or whatever.
Yeah. Yeah.
And it's so curious, isn't it, how we're changing the narrative with cannabis, right? So different substances get stigmatized differently. But whatever that belief is, it can either have that impact of, bringing me closer to or further away from a reflection about it. So I really think that this idea around, can we have compassion to all fellow human beings, that whatever's going on for them, there's a human story there. And Gabor Mate said something interesting. I interviewed him once for another video. He said there's two kinds of compassion. One compassion is, may I understand the journey that brought you here, but may I also have the compassion of possibility to be able to imagine where you may go. Right? So that if we see someone who's evidently struggling, that instead of having a story about that person of like, oh man, that guy doesn't have his act together, what the hell is wrong with him? It's like, okay, I can imagine that there's an honest pathway, that if that was me, if I'd been dealt those cards, there would be me.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah, absolutely.
So I let go of judging that, and hey, what could this person's better life look like? Right? And is there a way I can support that? And judgment is not the starting point ever for those meaningful, those helpful kinds of connections.
Thank you for the reminder. I think I needed that today.
Yeah.
Thanks. I do hope that if people explore the videos, think about where can you post some of the spotlight videos? Where can you share this? Health Canada has picked up the video series. They've added it to their Ease the Burden campaign. In our video series, there's a little link tree that it shares a number of resources, both around stigma reduction, but also how can you get help? What are some harm reduction practices you can consider if you're using substances? So I would just hope that this video series can be shared in a way that I hope can deconstruct some of the beliefs about substance use.
Yeah.
And around safety and around caring about each other. Reducing some of the oppressive messages around, hey, suck it up, do your job, fight through the pain, and then blow off steam on the weekend.
Yeah.
And just rip it up.
Yeah. Starting to think about taking care of each other. And I think that's a great entry point as well, because sometimes it's too overwhelming, I think, to start examining ourselves, especially if we don't have any experience doing that. But if we want to help, we want to make things better, start by thinking about how can we use all of these materials, this podcast, the Building Hope video series, how can we use them to help start supporting each other and changing the culture around us. And I think that's a great entry point that's a little bit safer than diving straight in on ourselves when we don't have a lot of experience doing that.
Right. Yeah, beautifully said.
This has been a Fraser House Society project, hosted by Daniel Snyder, co-hosted and produced by Karen Jansen, managed by Delan Young from the traditional, ancestral, and unceded territory of the Coast Salish peoples. Production of this material has been made in part through a financial contribution of Health Canada. The views expressed herein do not necessarily reflect the views of Health Canada or Fraser House Society. The content of this podcast is conversation between people with living experience and should not be taken as professional advice. If you're a tradesperson who wants to help make things better, please contribute at tradespodcast.com.